This episode is proudly supported by Crunch. Running a hospitality business isn't for the faint-hearted. Between ordering stock, scheduling rosters, paying bills, motivating your team, and keeping customers happy, there's a lot on your plate. It's no surprise that business planning often gets put on the back burner. Well, here's something that can help. Introducing Crunch, a new app to help simplify the business side of hospo. With Crunch, you get access to practical, bite-sized education, proven strategies, and a supportive community of hospo owners just like you. When it comes to the Crunch, if you're looking for proven ways to build a successful, sustainable business, Crunch has you covered. Try Crunch now. To get 14 days free, just head to crunchhospo.com.au.
Bigger doesn't mean better. Bigger doesn't mean more profit, that's for sure. So I think being able to stay small, stay boutique, stay special is something that should not be taken for granted.
This is The Producers. I'm Danny Vallant. Welcome to the third collaboration between Deep in the Weeds Producers Podcast and AgriCultured, a festival which showcases and connects the produce and people of northern Tasmania, or Lutruwita as it's called in Aboriginal culture. This is a special part of the world with beautiful, fertile lands, true seasons and rich traditions. Many farmers are on generational properties, but others, like today's guest, are producer newbies. Our first podcast in this series is with duck farmer Bec Rumble from Lone Goose Farm in the Meander Valley. Like many small farmers in northern Tassie, she's a corporate escapee from the Big Island, having moved from Melbourne with her husband Paul and learning a lot about Muscovy ducks very, very quickly. Join us as we meet their lone goose Gayle and hear a fascinating farming story.
Sure. My name is Bec Rumble. I'm the female half of Lone Goose Farm, and we farm Muscovy ducks in Tasmania. So we are technically in the Meander Valley. We are in a valley. It's quite low here and it gets quite cold here. We're set on 50 acres of pretty flat land, but we have views of the Western Tiers here in Tassie. You come up a very long drive and you see an old farmhouse. She's about 120 years old. But if you pass her, you'll see a large dam where our resident platypus Pip is swimming at dusk. And then you'll continue down to the back paddocks where you'll see at the peak of our season 900 Muscovies grazing on pasture. We do get a lot of phone calls from people asking if we farm geese, and we're like, no, we're Lone Goose Farm, and Lone is spelt Lone. The reason for that is when we first arrived to the property in April in 2019, we walked out to our dam and there was this goose that looked at us and she promptly flew away. And I was like, oh, well, that was nice while it lasted. But she came back the next day and she's not left since. So Gayle is our resident goose. She hangs out with our ducks. Sometimes she hangs out with the little ones when they're on grass. Sometimes she hangs out with the breeders. Today she was down in the back paddocks hanging out with the ducks that are going to be processed soon. She just wanders around. It's her farm. So we're Lone Goose Farm.
You may know ducks. You may eat ducks. But if you're eating ducks in Australia, they are probably not Muscovy ducks. What's the difference?
So Muscovy is a duck, obviously, because we're a duck farm. They are one of the breeds of duck and highly used across Europe and America for meat, but not so much in Australia. In Australia, we tend to grow pecan ducks. They're a lot more commercially viable than Muscovies. They fatten up in half the time and they lay a lot more eggs than Muscovies do. But we feel that Muscovies are a better tasting duck. They've got a bit more of a ducky flavour. All duck is delicious, but Muscovies are our preference.
Bec and Paul are definitely not farmers from way back, but they long harboured a dream to throw in their corporate jobs and acquire a piece of land to do something different. It's about connection, the pace of life, and definitely about eating well.
So my husband Paul and I were first generation farmers. any sort of farming, not just duck farming, first generation farmers. I come from a management consultancy background, and Paul is an engineer, and you never stop being an engineer. But 5 years ago, it was probably longer than 5 years ago, we always knew that we wanted to farm something somewhere, and we really enjoyed eating duck. But then I think as we found out how most duck is farmed in Australia, we felt that there was a better way, and if that better way was to happen, then maybe we should be part of that better way. So we threw in those corporate jobs on the mainland, or as the Tassies say, on the North Island. So we threw in those jobs and bought 50 acres in Birrallee and started farming ducks. We always had a veggie garden where we were, and I had chickens in my front yard. We just always felt really connected to food, and we're very much foodies. We're very much eaters, and love being able to grow it ourselves and know the provenance of our food. And then we were watching a lot, like we'd always go to the farmers markets in Melbourne, and, you know, there was Great Ocean Ducks that was doing really cool stuff. And then there was also a View to Vulcan farm that was up near Trentham that were also farming ducks. And so we got to see what they were doing in relation to farming poultry, and we were like, we think that's how it should be done. I think if you're going to eat meat, which we do, that make sure that animal has had the best possible life you can. And so that's what we try to do here at Lone Goose Farm with our ducks.
When they first started thinking about farming, Bec and Paul felt they should stay close to home, but they realised they were priced out of Victoria. If you're going to jump, why not jump to Tassie?
We got engaged in Tassie, and it's a beautiful area, obviously. We were actually thinking initially we needed to stay in Victoria because I had a lot of restaurant contacts, and if we were going to be growing food, then it would help having contacts to know who to sell your food to. But to be honest, it was a bit price restrictive. If we were going to buy land in Victoria or even in New South Wales, one of us would have had to keep working, and that would have given one of us a lifestyle choice that we wanted, but not both of us. Whereas Tassie was a lot easier to get into market-wise, and it meant that we could go all in on farming. Like if we were going to jump, we were really going to jump. And so we could both come all in and give this a good go and not have massive financial pressures hanging over our heads.
Bec and Paul love eating duck. But how did they land on the little-known Muscovy? Chef and restaurateur Annie Smithers is involved.
So the last restaurant tour of Melbourne, we know that Tassie has amazing food down here, but we also enjoyed eating out in Melbourne a lot. So we went to the classics. So we did the Vue de Mons, and we did the Atticas and the Oh My in Beaconsfield, and we went to Fermier in Trentham that Annie Smithers owns. And we were chatting to Annie after our lunch saying, we're just next week going to move to Tasmania and become duck farmers. And she's like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Can you please farm Muscovy ducks? And we were like, okay, we don't even know what a Muscovy duck is, but sure, Annie, we'll do it. And so then when we came down here, we started looking at all the different varieties of ducks that we could have grown. Most people in Australia are growing Pekin ducks. But we looked at Muscovies and they came out winning for us. You know, they're a quiet bird. We were just down in the back paddocks and there were 300 Muscovies around us and you didn't really hear a thing. And they have a really delicious flavour. Nice slow growing too.
Deciding to farm is one thing, but deciding how to farm is an ongoing process. Bec shares some tales of how Lone Goose got started.
We're a closed loop system, pretty much. Most people, when they're growing poultry, will hatch eggs in an incubator, and we tried that in year one, but we had a 92% failure rate. So we put 3,000 eggs in an incubator and got 250 ducklings out, which was pretty disappointing to say the least. But the one duck that we first got, our Muscovy that we first got, she hatched 45 ducklings on her own that season without our intervention. And we thought, well, maybe they're onto something. So the next year, we let the ducks do what they do best, and so we let them sit on their own eggs and hatch their own eggs, and then when the ducklings were born, we'd take the ducklings and put them in a stable, so which are our converted stables, which are brooders. So Muscovies are really great mums when it comes to hatching ducklings. They're not the best mums when it comes to keeping those ducklings alive. If you have a mother duck who hatches 15 ducklings over the period of 2 weeks, that 15 will dwindle to maybe 3. So that's because there are overhead predators that just come in and go, I'll take you, thank you, little duckling, and fly off with them. So we find by collecting them when they're 2 days old, 1 or 2 days old, and popping them into our stables that they stay alive. They're under heat mats in there, and they stay in our brooders with access to grass until they're about 5 weeks old. At that point, they go onto our paddocks out the back, and we strip graze them up our paddocks, moving them every twice a week maybe, up the paddocks so that they get fresh grass all the time.
Running a closed-loop farm means being involved in the processing of the ducks too. Working in abattoirs probably wasn't in the original vision, but it's an important part of running an ethical and connected business.
The processing side is something that we are heavily involved in. Paul and I never thought that we would be working in abattoirs in our lives, but we are. We head to Scottsdale to Hounslow Game Birds, and Paul has his meat processing license now, and so sometimes we hire that facility, but sometimes we actually work with Eddie, who's the owner of it too, and so we'll process 60 birds, maximum of 60 birds, and we only sell fresh ducks, so we're only taking ducks to the abattoir that will then be going to restaurants 2 days later. So our ducks are always fresh, always going to restaurants, and only killing to order. I tell you what, the first few were hard. It's not nice taking a life from something, but I think, again, if you're going to eat meat, then it's really important to know where that meat has come from and what sort of life it's been given and what sort of death it's had as well. So us being involved in the abattoir actually means that we ensure that there is quality of life and quality of death for our birds.
Usually, one of the hardest parts of starting a farm is working out how to get produce to market. But for Bec and Paul, the path has been surprisingly easy.
That was much easier than it probably should have been, which we're really, really fortunate for. So firstly, we're growing Muscovies, and there are very few other Muscovy farmers in Australia, but a lot of the chefs in Australia have done starters in Europe, and so they're used to working with Muscovies. So when they got a sniff that we were doing Muscovies, the inquiries started coming to us rather than the other way around. We were really, really fortunate that ABC Radio Hobart, ABC Radio did a little segment on us when we were first starting, and then did a follow-up segment a year after, and so that was Tas Country Hour did that. And so then we got a lot of inquiries from all over Australia for that one. But the decision that we made really early on in the piece is that we would keep our birds in Tasmania. We're only small. We grow about 900 birds a year. We don't need to be sending them to the mainland to sell them. There are plenty of fantastic restaurants in Tasmania who use our ducks, and it means that we can be part of a bigger Tasmanian story. We're the Tasmanian story of the growers, and then the restaurants that are doing amazing things with Tassie produce continue that story on. We count ourselves very lucky to be working with the calibre of restaurants that we do, and they take birds from us pretty much every week or every kill or every second kill. We work, am I allowed to name drop restaurants? Okay, cool. So we work with Tim at Van Bone in Bream Creek. They're amazing, and he takes our ducks for his degustation menu all the time. We work with Ryan at Templo. Love their food as well. We love all of their food. Stephen at the Agrarian Kitchen is using our birds. Up here in Launceston, you've got Thomas at Grain of the Silos and Nick at Joseph Cromie. We also go out to the East Coast, so there's Waterloo Inn and also Piermont who use our birds. And then we have a loft as well, and a couple of others in there, and I'm sorry if I've forgotten them. But yeah, it's a real privilege to have Tassie's best chefs using our ducks. Unfortunately, we're too far. Oh, and of course we have FICO, so Oscar at FICO, and also Kobe at Diamaker uses our birds as well. So it's an absolute privilege, but unfortunately we're a 3-hour drive from Hobart, so it's a bit hard to pop down to Hobart to eat our ducks. But we do make a special note of going to at least 2 or 3 restaurants a year. Sometimes we get our birds because they're on the menu, but sometimes we don't.
Farmers know their produce intimately, but they don't always get to experience what chefs do with it. Bec shares some in-restaurant experiences.
I think the main one for me would be when we went to Melbourne last year. They did something like a 15-course degustation, and they have their own market garden down there, so they're using all their own produce, and they source Boomer Bay oysters that are about 3 kilometres down the road from them, and they're using Tongola cheese, so that's Kate and Ian, who are friends of ours. They're using their cheeses, and they're using milk from someone local, and our duck showcases as the protein, as well as some charcuterie that they've made from Long Name Farms pigs. So we got to eat our livers. So it was a duck parfait that came in a scooped out crispy Jerusalem artichoke shell, which was phenomenal. We then he uses a wood fire, so he did the breast on the crown, but then the leg was also done on the hibachi, and so that was phenomenal. And then dessert also had a duck fat caramel with it. And so we got to have the duck across multiple courses and got to see him using the entire bird. But I think the thing that I like the most about when we go to a restaurant is watching other people eat our duck and just sort of see the expressions. Like we like to think that we grow good produce, and because our restaurants are ordering it again and again, then we're quietly confident, but it's really about how the end user experiences it. And so being able to see people enjoy your produce is really, really nice, because sometimes you don't see that whole system. So it's nice.
Some would imagine that farming is isolated, but even though Bec and Paul aren't living in as close proximity to people as they were in the city, they're certainly not lacking in community.
I think that when we moved to Tassie, it was all about being part of community. It was something that we were looking for on the mainland, and it's really hard to achieve in the suburbs. So when we got down here, we knew no one for about 6 months, which was a bit lonely, but we had a lot of work to do on the farm as well. So, that kept us busy. But then as we started the business and we started meeting other small scale farmers and started meeting restaurateurs, everyone is just totally interested in what you're doing. It doesn't feel like there's competition down here. It feels like everyone is just in your corner and everyone wants you to be successful and everyone's supporting each other. We were part of the Sprout Producer Program. Have you heard of them? Yeah, so part of the Sprout Producer Program, they're a non-for-profit that helps small-scale farmers in the state. And we met a lot of fantastic small-scale farmers that way, which has been really lovely. So we're part of not only a community in our local community, but part of a bigger farming community and part of a restaurant community. And we like to think that we're giving people a story, or our restaurants a story that they can then share with their customers, because people come to Tassie for the experience.
Farms of every size are important to the food system, and it's not just small farmers who care deeply about what they do. But there is something special about small producers. What does Bec think?
Oh, lots of reasons. I think, I think big farms also love their animals, so I don't think that one is doing better than the other. Small scale has a closer touch. Okay, it's like we're in it all day, every day. It's generally only the owners of the farm who are working the farm. We're so close to it, and I think you're able to do something that's a little bit different when you're small. People tell us to scale all the time. They're like, you could sell double the birds, you could export to the mainland, you could export overseas, like your birds would sell. And we're like, yeah, we know they would sell. But I think that bigger doesn't mean better. Bigger doesn't mean more profit, that's for sure. If we were double in size, we'd have to employ somebody, and that would take any profit that we would make from doubling in size. So I think being able to stay small, stay boutique, stay special is something that should not be taken for granted. Just give them a chance, you know. And also they're doing, I think that small farms actually show the cost of growing food. You know, I see chickens for sale at the supermarkets and they're saying $5 a kilo. And I'm like, there's no way you can grow a chicken for $5 a kilo. So small scale farmers are actually growing quality produce and that's the price that the produce should be. The big farmers, they're able to make it more cost effective. But what are they doing to make it more cost effective? So I think from a consumer standpoint, having small farms, those small farms want to talk to you about how they're growing food, want to share those stories, will take you through every step of it of this is how we grow. And it's an education that we can help provide consumers that they might not get elsewhere.
It's been a huge journey from a city childhood to a corporate career to making a big decision to live on the land and be a farmer. How does Bec reflect on the journey?
With pride, I think. Like, I don't know, I grew up in Sydney, like I was in the centre of Sydney growing up. It's like we were not connected to farms in the middle of Sydney. You know, farming wasn't even an option at my school. I don't think if anyone said, I want to be a farmer, that my school would have gone, yeah, great. Like they would have said, yeah, great. They were a supportive school and whatnot, but I don't think they would have known what to do with that. Whereas down in Tassie, like every family is a farming family, which is fantastic. But I do look at I've had a very varied career. I've run companies and, you know, run sales teams and whatnot. And this is the best step in my career. I think that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. I think that we're helping tell a story. I think we're caring for land. I think we're caring for animals. You know, we're doing some business stuff as well. And it's a really beautiful life that we've created. When we're not renovating a 120-year-old house and when I'm not weeding a garden, the life is spectacular. Like the food is amazing because you're growing most of it yourselves. The community is phenomenal. Like we have a better social life down here than we ever had in Melbourne. You know, having other families over for dinner on a Tuesday night, that would never happen in Melbourne, but here it happens every single week. It's just so supportive and lovely. And then we get to have guests come down. So I've got a whole suite of my school friends coming down in a couple of days' time and they get to see the life that we're living here and we get to share it with people. So, you know, we like to think that we get to give our families a holiday just by coming and visiting their family, which is nice.
Plenty of city people have an inkling that urban life isn't the end game. But how do you go about fulfilling a tree change dream? Bec has thoughts.
Talk to other farmers who are doing what you're interested in doing. Some might be open to talking to you, some might not be, but if they aren't, then there are people out there who would be happy to talk to you. And maybe ask to see if you could visit that farm and see what the reality of farming is, because it's hard, dirty work, but it's rewarding work at the same time. Like the abattoir days aren't fun days, but walking down the back paddock on a beautiful frosty morning and feeding ducks and having everyone wag their little tails at you and say good morning is actually beautiful. So do a little bit of due diligence and, you know, don't just think it's going to be all skipping through fields and whatnot. Like get an understanding of what it's going to be and then dive in. And there's ways that you can test it, right? So there's ways that you can test and learn. It could be that you know, ask to find somebody who might lease you an acre or so who can give you a bit of a try of doing what you want to do, or ask if you can go and work on a farm for a week and see what that's like. And once you know it's what you want to do, jump in.
Bec won't pretend that she loves every minute of life on Lone Goose Farm, but she's got no misgivings about the move she and Paul have made. What does she love most about what she does?
Everything, even when I don't love it. I think the thing that we can see here is that we're making a difference. I'm a lot calmer in the last 5 years that I've been here. It is really rewarding work because it's good for my soul. I'm not one of those spiritual people, but I feel right in doing this work, and it doesn't really feel like work. The one thing that is known, but you should know about farming when you're farming livestock in particular, is that there's no day off. So, weekends don't exist, and what's a public holiday? I don't even know when a public holiday is. And to be able to get away from farm, sometimes you need a really good support network who can help look after farm, and there are certain times of year. And so people would say that that might be a bit of a hindrance, but I don't see it that way, because we get to live in beautiful country with a lot of flexibility, with a lot of freedom to really do what we want.
Lone Goose Farm is small, fresh and finding its way, not just with strategies for farming Muscovy ducks, but also into the hearts and onto the menus of Tasmania's finest restaurants. Bec and Paul's pretty farm is a vindication of their city dreams, that there must be a better and more connected way to live, find community, and be the food systems change they want to see. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Danny Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast, or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.